Hi, my name's Becca,
And my name's Paige.
and we decided to do our project on art and mental illness because so many of the world's most influential artists have suffered from mental illnesses.
These mental illnesses have seemed to have impact on their creativity and have created one of their most influential pieces throughout history. The first painting we decided to analyze was the Fairy Feller's Masterstroke by Richard Dodd, which he created from 1855 to 1864. Richard Dodd was a Victorian artist where he became famous throughout his life not only for his artistic ability, but also for the killing of his father. Toward the end of December in 1842, while traveling up the Nile by boat, Dodd experienced dramatic personality change where he became delusional, violent, and believing he was under the influence of the Egyptian god. In August that year, Dodd was convinced his dad was a devil and killed him with a knife, where he then fled to France. After confessing of the killing of his father, he was returned to England, where he was committed to the criminal department of Bethlehem Psychiatric Hospital. Here, Dodd created many of his paintings, including the Fairy Feller's Masterstroke, which he worked on for 9 years. The painting centers around a gathering of fairies in a grassy undergrowth and with the anticipation of the feller to cut the chestnut in half. In the center of the picture, the white-bearded bishop raises his left hand, commanding the woodsman to not strike until the signal is given. The rest of the fairy band looks anxious to see whether or not the woodsman will successfully split the chestnut in half. The magician-like partridge wears a triple crown, signifying that he is a pope, which he resisted killing and urged to attack him. The rest of the characters are made up from his imagination. He created this microscopic detailed sketch, and then painted each area fully before moving on to the next. He used thick impasto layering technique, applying tiny blobs to create the crowded composition. This work was commissioned by George Hayden, the steward of the Bethlehem Hospital, who asked Dodd to paint him a fairy painting. This painting represents Dodd's creativity and his twisted mind during his mental illness. The next artist we decided to analyze was Kaleidoscope Cats by Louis Wain, which he created in the early 1900s. Louis Wain was an English artist best known for his personified large-eyed cats. After his father's death at the age of 20, he was left to support his mother and 5 sisters. This is when he decided to become a freelance artist and specified in countrysides and animals. At the age of 23, Wayne got married to a woman by the name of Emily Richardson. Soon after their marriage, Emily began battling breast cancer and found pleasure in their pet cat, Peter. This is when Wayne began painting images of Peter, which Emily enjoyed and encouraged him to publish. Years after Emily's death, Wayne decided to draw personified cats, doing things such as playing instruments, serving tea, and playing cards. During the 1900s, Wayne was producing an average of 600 new designs of cats every year. By the 1920s, he was in poverty. His depression continued and his mental illness worsened. Often known, he decided to strike out in violent and erratic ways. He was eventually committed to the London Springfield Mental Hospital. They believe he contracted schizophrenia. Wayne continued to draw for pleasure while in the mental institution. His work from this period marked by cats with bright colors, flowers, and abstract patterns. This is where he began a series of Kaleidoscope Cats. He began to break out of reality, and his cats became more abstract and disjointed. He made polygons that transformed the cats merely out of their own shape. It was at this time where he began a sense of euphoric and higher state of consciousness, similar to what the individual feels when they're on LSD. This explains his abstract images of cats where they transform from his personified cats to these abstract qualities in bright colors.
So this next piece is titled "The General Feel of the Island of Neveranger." It was created by Adolf Wolfli in 1911. This piece was a drawing, and it was made with pencil and colored pencil on newsprint. The size of the drawing was 99.8 by 72.2 centimeters. It's currently on display in the Adolf Wolfli Foundation in the Museum of Fine Arts, Bern. A little background on Wolfli. He grew up as an orphan after the death of his mother, and he worked as a wage worker from 1880 to 1890. At this time, he attempted child molestation, and he was arrested. He spent the next 2 years in prison, where he felt very alone and isolated from everyone. This only worsened his condition, because when he was released, he made another attempt, which landed him in a psychiatric institution. They diagnosed him with schizophrenia, and he spent the rest of his life institutionalized. It wasn't until then that he began to draw. The rest of his life, since he spent it locked up, he ended up creating 45 books full of music compositions, drawings, poems, texts, collages, and he did this until he died in 1930 of stomach cancer. In the painting, Wolfli displays no motif, no background, no foreground, and no representation of perspective. But he does, however, display a composition, and the composition is made up of various circle-like forms that are arranged more or less symmetrically. The colors are evenly distributed throughout the sheet, and there's the deep blue water that courses through the painting and that provides a special accent. The lines and patterns, the simple drawings, musics, and text all are displayed in no particular direction. The notes are said to represent the simple melodies in folk music, and the text you see throughout the painting is made up of his made-up autobiography. The abstract geometric shapes can contrast with detectable figures. The distinct figures you can see are the heads with the cross and the snails. The complexity of the geometric shapes and this work as a whole remain very resistant to interpretation, and it leaves many viewers very confused and irritated.
This last painting I decided to analyze was The Maze by William Kurlick, which he painted in 1953. William Kurlick was a Canadian artist who suffered from childhood from the oppression of his farmer father. He developed an interest in art at an early age, but was not encouraged by his hardworking parents. Despite this, he enrolled in the College of Art in Toronto, Canada. In his mid-20s, he moved to England at the age of 25, which he there admitted himself into the psychiatric hospital in London. He was there treated for schizophrenia. It was at this hospital where he was given a room to paint and created The Maze. This painting consists of a central image of the inside of Kurlick's skull, opened up to reveal 17 compartments, which consists of a representation of his youth or tortured mind. The subject is divided into two sections. The left-hand side represents his thoughts inside of his head, and the right-hand side is the inside of the rest of his body. The top left is the political aspect, starting with his attachment to the Ukraine nationalism. Next to that, we see himself representing as an early age, him being bullied as a parent and as a kid and rejected by his schoolmates. He portrays his fear of being rejected by his father and being thrown out of the house. In the left-hand side, we see rag dolls in a merry-go-round to represent his lack of feeling and direction for dancing. In the center, he uses a white rat as a focal point to symbolize himself being filled with frustration, unable to escape the maze of depression. In the bottom left-hand side, he represents his outside life where he continues to be the outcast. Finally, in the bottom right, he depicts life and death. He uses a museum of hopelessness to show his view of life, as well as a conveyor belt to show it is only a matter of time until everyone is dead. Kierlich uses his mental illness as a guideline throughout his whole painting to express his thoughts and emotions to the world. He was given this room to paint as a way to show the nurses how he is feeling.
So the next piece we decided to analyze is Untitled Courtyard by Martin Ramirez. He created this piece in 1954, and the piece is done with pencil and colored pencil on piece paper. The size of the drawing is 40.5 by 36 inches. This piece, along with the majority of his known work, is on display at the Folk Art Museum. So the background of Ramirez starts in Mexico, where he grew up and started a family. In 1925, he left his family behind and moved to California to find work. He worked on the railroads for a few years before the Great Depression hit, and he lost his job. He had never learned English and became homeless. The police picked him up and took him to a mental institution where they diagnosed him with catatonic schizophrenia. It wasn't until then that he learned of his natural artistic gift and began drawing. Ramirez was forced to get creative since he was in an institution and had to use paper bags and postcards glued together with a mix of his saliva and potato starch to create art. Unfortunately, his art remained unknown until after he died of tuberculosis in 1963. So in this piece, we see the same use of iconography that Ramirez used in the majority of his work. He often depicted things like trains, animals, tunnels, abstractions, and architecture, which represented both Mexican traditions and 20th century modernization that he experienced once he moved to America. This piece is thought to be representative of his life in confinement, and we see a train emerging from the tunnel towards the top of this image, and this was a common element seen throughout his work, but it often represented different things. In this case, it could be portraying the train taking off for unknown parts of the world, which is something he'll never get to experience. He seems to be depicting himself right here as caged in by the walls that are in the foreground and the arc-like patterns. The structure resembles his psychiatric ward, and the animals are also depicted as being caged in and being confined by the concentric lines that he uses in a lot of his art. Those lines often represent landscapes and tunnels, and it is known that Ramirez made his art from the position of being unfree, so isolation and confinement are both themes that are known to have driven this piece. So the last piece we chose to analyze was the White Infinity Net number 28. This piece was created by Yayoi Kusama, and it was made in 1960. The painting was made using oil on canvas, and the size of it is 147.6 by 111.1 centimeters. This painting is part of Kusama's famous White Infinity Net series. Kusama was born and raised in Japan by an abusive mother and a womanizing father. Her mother always forced her to spy on her father, and this led to her having a contempt for sexuality. She started to experience hallucinations at the young age of 10, and she would see flowers and patterns coming to life. She began to recreate her hallucinations through art. And when she was 13, Kusama was sent to work in a military factory during World War II. This had a lasting effect on her adolescence. She then attended the Kyoto School of Arts and Crafts, and ended up moving to New York City in 1958. The creativity in her work led to many copycat artists who stole her business, and she was having a hard time making money, and this eventually led to her attempting suicide. She has always been open about her mental illness, and she chooses to live in a mental hospital. She has always said that her way of expressing her mental illness is through art. Kusama's countless artistic endeavors has led to her being acknowledged as one of the most important living artists to come out of Japan. As we're looking at this painting from a distance, viewers can just see monochromes. When you look at it from a close point of view, the surfaces and layers appear. The tiny circles made with white paint cover the entire painting, and they also have a wash of gray underlay. The painting has detailed lacework, causing the illusion that the nets go beyond the painting. The design is not random and it's not systematic. The closest thing you can compare it to is a visible matter cluster around invisible points of gravity. Kusama's purpose of creating this illusion was to produce an infinity. The obscured layer represents what she's experiencing during episodes. The nets block from viewing what lies beyond them. Kusama explains her white infinity net as being her purest form of expression. The infinity nets have been found to associate with minimal and odd painting, post-minimalism, and zero and null movements. And even though Kusama painted this work in the 1960s, it remains completely contemporary and relevant. The white infinity net paintings are considered to be some of Kusama's most captivating pieces and are greatly appreciated throughout the art world.